Hi there, my name is Ben. I'm from Tayside in Pictures based in Dundee, and I'm going to show you how to process images after you have taken 10 or more of the same image and stack them into Photoshop and come up with images like this and turn them into something that looks like this, almost noise free. So the way I do this personally is probably different to some other people's ways. I know there are various different stacking softwares, but I like to use Photoshop and Lightroom. It's the way I've always edited my photos. I find the workflow to be nice and simple. Anyway, let's see if we can follow along. So I've got here my images from the other night, some of which are better than others. I'm going to go with this image here and show you how to stack it, as I said in my introduction there. So the way I do it is I highlight the images, the 10 that I've taken stacked, all exactly the same image, one after the other. So I deselect them, open the first one and just scroll my way through. Okay, don't worry about the slight movement from the drone. The alignment in Photoshop will sort that out. So yeah, I've taken 10 images in a row. I'm going to highlight these 10 images without doing any processing to them at all. Right click, go to edit in, and at the bottom here, open as layers in Photoshop. So that will take you over to your Photoshop, and it will start opening them in layers. You see your layers appearing on the right hand side here. That'll just take a couple of minutes. Okay, so there they are. All 10 images are opened as separate layers in Photoshop. Here they are over in the layer bar over here. There is actually another way to load your 10 images or however many images you've taken into Photoshop. If you go over to File here, this is if you don't use Lightroom or you prefer to just load them straight into Photoshop rather than going into Lightroom and importing your images first. If you go over to File, Scripts, Load Files into Stack, then when it comes up with this dialog, you hit Browse and you would go to the folder where your images are. You would select your 10 images. Okay, they will show you that the 10 images are there to line up, and much the same way it will start loading your images into a new stack. So that's both ways to get your images into Photoshop. Now that you have 10 separate layers over here, the next step is to highlight your 10 layers, come over to edit, and then auto align layers. Now I'll bring up all these different things almost as if you were creating a panorama. You just leave it on auto, hit OK, and it will start aligning everything based on the content. And again, that takes just a couple of minutes. Okay, now you can see that because of the movement of the drone in the sky, it's actually aligned them, but you actually lose a tiny little bit around the edges here, just where the drone has pitched and yawed while it's been taking the 10 different images. That's okay, we crop that out afterwards. So our next step is to come to the layer, drop down and Smart Objects and convert to Smart Object. That just takes a second or two. Lovely, that's converted to a Smart Object. Next step is to come up to layer again, go to Smart Objects, come down to Stack Mode. Now you've got various different stack modes here. The only two we're interested in is Mean and the Median. Now Mean, basically it keeps objects like moving vehicles, light trails, artifacts like that. So in this one we've got here, you can see that there's some traffic. There's a bus moving there, various cars, different things like that. Now with Mean stacking, that will keep those in. Now it will fade them, and it will, because they're stacked one on top of the other and it's randomly getting rid of noise, they will look a lot duller. So if your aim is to keep all those in your frame, you'll need to go in after you've finished and brighten them up. But Mean is the one that I would use most of the time because I would be shooting scenes like this that does have moving objects in the frame. So stack mode median removes these artifacts. So if we were to use that, the bus over here would be removed, all these light trails would be removed, and it would just look like empty streets. The only thing it would keep was just here, for instance, there's a couple of cars. I think when I stacked this the first time, it kept a couple of these cars in because they must have been stationary for a few minutes as they sit in the traffic lights. Or one of the other frames must have had stationary cars in it that it kept. However, I'm going to go for mean. So we'll just let that run. It should only take a minute or two. Lovely, so that is your image stacked. Now it may not look like much more, but if you zoom in, you can see that noise has almost all but disappeared. That's at 100% magnification there. You can see how it's kept these artifacts in, these light trails. The bus has faded a bit because you can see it going around the corner here, just because there's 10 images stacked on top of each other and noise is completely random. It stacks it one on top of the other, obviously, and that's what gets rid of the noise, but unfortunately it dumbs down a lot of the colour and the artifacts that you get. So if I just come back out here. Now the way I process these is to use the Camera Raw filter up here, which will take you to the Adobe Camera Raw interface. I do know a couple of people that what they do is they export it somehow to Lightroom because they prefer the interface of Lightroom. Now when I started editing 10 years ago, I was just using Photoshop, so I'm quite familiar with the Camera Raw filters. So that's how I'm going to do it. So if I come to this Adobe Camera Raw filter, and you just get your standard filter as if it was a raw file. Now first thing I'm going to do is stick my white balance on auto because it just warms it up a bit. I bring my highlights down and my shadows up because that's generally what I would do on most of my images anyway, to just recover some of the highlights. Now if I lift this exposure, let's just go to +1. +1, right, sorry about that. So if we just use that as a guideline, drop the highlights a bit, up the shadows a bit, and then put your exposure on +1, you can see when you zoom in, everything's lifted, everything's brighter. There's a lovely reflection here from the Earl Grey building here in the centre of Dundee. All the lights in the background, all the beautiful sky. Now I would also be lifting things like the clarity a bit, maybe add just a touch of vibrance in there. I think I would probably lift my shadows a bit more, drop my highlights right down, purely because the street lights are quite bright on this evening that I took this. The lights on the hotels and stuff, and the Discovery down here just makes them show up a little bit better. I generally don't touch the whites and the blacks here. I'll sometimes come down to the curve tab and play with the highlights here and the lights, because it actually changes the ultimate end of the lights and darks. So this will deal with things in the sky, like the extreme brightness in the sky, and these lights here will deal with things like the street lights, so everything starts getting brighter when you lift these, and obviously duller when you lower it. So if I lift those lights a bit, I think that's just about all I would do for this image, if I'm being honest with you. I wouldn't touch the colour grading or the optics or the geometry, anything like that. I don't ever apply a profile to my drone images because there isn't a particular profile for the Mini 2 yet. There's no crop in this because it's just a filter. What I would personally do for this is just click on the graduated filters over here, pull a grad down, maybe just in the sky. Now that's already got some edits on it, so if I bring the highlights back, the contrast back, the shadows back to 0, bring it all back. I'd maybe just cool down the sky a bit to give it a bit more of a blue sky, maybe a bit of saturation just to bring up the orange. We drop the highlights a touch. But yeah, generally that's where I would sit with that. I think basically my finished image. You hit OK at the end there, and that's it. What I would do now to save this is I would right click on my file, on my layer over here, and flatten the image, and I'll put it just back to a single layer. I would be cropping it with my original ratio so that when I actually crop it, it crops in the same ratio that it was shot in. And you just want to align everything the way you want. You can rotate it as well. That's not for me, but the drone gimbal generally keeps it with a decent horizon. That's just about it, if I'm being honest. Hit the tick at the end when you're finished with your cropping, and I just file save as and just leave it wherever you would normally keep your images. I would save everything to JPEG. For my aerial images, they're not particularly big, so I would just save them. I just save the one copy rather than making a social media copy as well, because they're only 12 megapixels when you use the full sensor size. So we'll just call this V and A above video, and that's it. I hope you managed to get something out of this video. I learned from a couple of other people that have done this. Scott McBride at Point One Photography, he's the one that pointed me in this direction. Honestly, the difference that it makes stacking these images, taking a little bit of time to just take more than one image of each shot that you're taking. I've actually been out tonight and taken a lot more. Actually, I've got one here that I took of McManus Building in Dundee. Just applied exactly the same similar settings, but exactly the same technique. 10 images, you know, drop the shadows, warm it up, and the original file for that is here. So that's what I originally took, and then that's what you come away with. So I hope everybody gets something out of this video. Hopefully it's not been too boring. I wanted to make this video because some of the other ones I'd seen were too long. Hopefully this won't be too bad. But yeah, enjoy. See you again.